All right, well, I guess we can begin. We're a couple minutes after the hour, and might as well start this off and see how far we get, and other people join us. I'm Jen Funderburk. This is the Poster Tips and Tricks webinar brought to you by the CFHA Research and Evaluation Committee. I am joined by Dr. Jeff Goody and Dr. Amber Landers. All three of us are really happy to have the small group that's here right now. And if others join, that would be nice. And if you're joining after the fact, I'm glad you're willing to watch our recording and check it out later. So we thought we would put this together. This is something that came up as being wanted by CFHA members. It should be hopefully very useful to those of you who may have never done a poster or who are prepping a poster for the first time. Or maybe you want to level up your posters and make them even better and learn some tips and tricks. And the three of us have some experience with that. So we thought we'd share it and give it to you. Let's see, let's move on to the next slide and share our disclaimer. So I am a clinical research psychologist at the VA Center for Integrated Healthcare. So I just need to make sure everybody knows that none of the views expressed here for me, as well as from Dr. Jeff Goody, have anything to do with the Uniformed Armed Services University, Department of Defense, Department of Veteran Affairs, or the US government. And they are just our opinions. Let me tell you about this committee called the Research and Evaluation Committee. If you're new to CFHA, or maybe even if you've been a member of CFHA for a while, this is a committee that does work throughout the year. We're all volunteers, but we are charged by the board of directors to grow interest and enthusiasm about research and program evaluation and quality improvement, and to just increase the opportunities for members to actively participate in those things, especially related to integrated care. That has a lot to do with the fact that integrated care is not so old, hasn't been around forever. And so evidence is one of the most powerful tools to make things spread and to get them into being. We have several initiatives. Webinars is one. Annual conference. We have a research and evaluation committee track, which I encourage you to consider going to if you are going to the conference. It helps teach you actual skills. It's not just about presenting. Hopefully you should be learning some skills in the midst. We also review and assist with the call for abstracts and abstract review. And we have a yearly award called the Fellowship Award, which will be given out this upcoming fall. If you're interested in the Leadership Council or being involved in any of these activities or want to learn more, you can definitely contact Christina Iman at her email there. We love to have volunteers help with us, usually in short stints. Or if you have interest in just getting some more leadership experience, we regularly look for members to join our Leadership Council. So feel free to reach out and ask more about that. All right, now next slide. The outline of what we're going to do. I'm going to begin the process of going from the abstract to identifying what to include in a poster. I'm going to pass the baton to Jeff, and he's going to cover formatting, who will pass the baton to Amber, who will cover presenting, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Next slide. Okay. So just to clarify, although we will often refer to the CFHA annual conference, all of these tips and tricks can be used for any type of poster at any type of conference. So it doesn't necessarily have to be CFHA, although I personally think that's the conference to attend. But I listed some other ones here that you might be going to or considering to go to. And obviously there's plenty more from where that's from. So hopefully it can be helpful in any arena. Next slide. First, take a moment, be happy. If you got selected to present a poster, that is a moment to celebrate. And we don't celebrate good moments very often. So take a moment and celebrate that. It's a really great thing. And it gives you a chance to develop professionally and share innovations that, not everybody gets a chance to do. So congratulations. Next slide. All right. So sometimes when you go back, you submit this abstract, and maybe it took a lot to do the abstract. But let me tell you, when you go back to the abstract, you're like, oh my gosh, here we go. I got to put together a poster. we recognize that sometimes you might feel overwhelmed, and we want to be here to make it less overwhelming. And that's kind of why we thought we would do this. We thought it would be helpful to ensure that you wouldn't have to necessarily feel overwhelmed when you're going through the process. So we broke it up into these pieces to make it easy. And if you follow these steps, I actually don't think it would take you very long to put together a poster. Next slide. Typical sections of a poster. So these are the typical sections that you'll see in most posters. Doesn't matter what the poster is on, these sections tend to be pretty consistent across all types of posters. And that means if they have research data or if they're just sharing like an innovation of some sort. Went to a suicide prevention conference recently where the poster was literally sharing this way to use Microsoft Teams and use some of the apps within Microsoft Teams to achieve better workflows in primary care. And it was really pictures of this system. You don't necessarily need to be having data included in yours to follow these sections, but generally speaking, this is the sections that you find, even in a poster like that. So what are these sections? What are they? The introduction, typical introduction, that's where you want to summarize the background on the topic. And so for this conference that I went to on the suicide prevention and this workflow that this guy figured out, he started talking, and in his introduction, he talked about the gaps in communication for suicide amongst the primary care team members. And so it was really kind of how the nurse has to be in charge of the screening. And then the next one has to be in charge of following up on the positive screen. And how do you make that communication? And so he cited some of the literature there. And really the most important part is conveying, like, why does this matter? Why should somebody who's reading your poster care about this? And that's the biggest is to be able to share the objective. The methods, what did you actually do? So that's where he had the pictures where he outlined, here's how I created this cool thing in Microsoft Teams to help our workflows go better. If you were doing an evaluation of some sort, maybe a program evaluation, quality improvement project, or a research study, this is where you would share, well, how did you evaluate it? Who and how many did you recruit? What measures did you use? And that would be what you share there. In the results section is what you share, what you found. So for this presentation that was not research-based, he described some of the qualitative information that the teams commented on of how this process saved time for them and made things a lot easier. For a research poster, you might be sharing more specifics like a table or a line graph directing us to what the findings were. And then in the discussion, what does this mean? What were the limitations and what are the next steps? And so for this example that I'm using, he talked about the limitations of, well, his primary care clinic works this way. This workflow helped them. Although it might be consistent with other primary care clinics, it doesn't mean that all primary care clinics work that way. And so he commented that that was a big limitation. And then what are next steps, like how to make this more available to other people. All right, next slide. When you're doing these, I already commented that these sections work even for non-data presentations too. Next slide. I think the next slide talks about it's really important when you're writing an abstract and you're filling out these sections to consider the context and the audience. So for typical poster sessions, if you've never been to one at a conference, I'll just comment, they almost always happen around meal times for some unknown reason to me. In the way distant past, this is about the time I was in graduate school. So at least, we're talking a little while from now, not that long, but about 20 years ago, they would have food. And I do appreciate whenever there's food available at poster sessions, even now. They used to even have open bars. That was also very nice. More and more of those things are being eliminated, but almost always they're around mealtime. So the people that are walking by are really hungry and understand that they really only have about an hour to walk through, and there's usually lots to see. This picture at the bottom is a good representation of how many posters people would have to walk by. So they want information that can be easily digested. So you have to think about that as you prepare your poster. Also, remember who the people are at this conference. So, for some conferences, I have to describe what integrated care means because sometimes people think I'm talking about chiropractic, acupuncture, and some of the other different types of integrated care that some people talk about, and they don't think about embedding behavioral health into medical settings. At CFHA, I don't have to do that. Everybody pretty much understands what I'm talking about. But that is a good example of how you need to think about the context of who you are actually presenting to. Next slide. Thanks, Jeff, for toggling. I do appreciate it. Lastly, I'll just encourage you to think about the conference theme. You should have probably thought about this when you submitted your abstract. Some conferences are very anal, and during the review process, the theme is given extra points in the experience. Sometimes it's not. But either way, obviously, everyone is coming together to talk about the theme. And a lot of the presentations will be focused on that theme. So it's really good if you pay attention to what the theme is and think about how it applies to your poster. It may or may not apply, but it's good to take the moment to think about it and use terms that might embrace that. This year's conference for 2024 for CFHA has got the innovating in the pursuit of healing as a theme. And so you may want to highlight aspects that are related to this concept of healing if your poster has the ability to do that. By considering the context, the audience, and the theme, you're just optimizing your poster for the people who are walking by and ensuring that you hit the highlights for them of what they're interested in. I'm going to now pass the baton to Jeff so he can share with you some highlights about and tips and tricks about formatting.
Great, thanks a lot, Jen. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about formatting and specifically with an idea of like you want to create your poster in a way that people will actually stop and talk to you about it. Or even if they don't even have time to stop, that they, while passing by, might be able to take some knowledge from your poster. The very first step that you should be taking after you've celebrated and after you've started thinking about how you might structure your poster, it is critical for you to go to a conference website and understand how much space you have to present your poster. I can't stress this enough. And this is something that you have to do for every conference every year. Don't assume, as I have done in the past, that they're going to have the same poster sizes that they had the last year. I have made that error and have come to a conference with a poster that was set up in landscape, but all the posters were actually supposed to be vertical. And so my poster was like hanging off the edges. And at one time I actually had to cut up the segments of the poster to fit it onto the board. I have made this error. Please don't make this error. Make sure you know. And CFHA has all of these poster guidelines on there. Most conferences are going to have something similar. I'll tell you about how much size you'll have. And so you'll notice this is actually a little bit unusual what CFHA has. So they have a 4 foot by 4 foot wide area where you will be doing your poster. And again, just because you have 4 feet by 4 feet does not mean that you should use every single inch of that space. You want to give yourself some space because even though that might be the size of the board, sometimes that there are borders on the poster mounting board, and so your poster can still be a little bit too big. So you want to think about going a little bit less than that. And so what I typically recommend is if you've got a space doing a half a foot less on each side usually is a good way to think about having size. This ensures that your poster will fit onto the poster board area, and it'll give you some space. Now, it doesn't mean that your poster has to be square like this is demonstrating. So you'll see we have the poster board area, which is the blue. So that's going out to the 4 feet on each side. And then your poster itself is actually 3.5 feet each side. And so this is organized as a square. It's not that your poster has to be this shape, but I would discourage you from exceeding these length limitations on each side. And so what will end up happening is that there's going to be an 8-foot long board, and they're going to have 2 different posters on there. So you'll have your awesome poster on one side, and then your neighbor's going to have a poster basically on the same board hanging next to yours. So it's really important that you, as I've said, that you're giving yourself that space. So, so as you form your poster, as you're setting it up in PowerPoint or in Word, wherever you're going to kind of format it, just make sure that you're adhering to those dimensions. Jen's already gone through and talked about kind of the key sections to include. One of the things that I'll come back to a little bit is that, oftentimes you want to avoid using any sort of paragraphs or a lot of words. You want to minimize the words that you're placing onto the poster. It becomes very overwhelming for folks as they're passing by if there's a lot of text on the poster. So you want to think about bullets, and you want to think about stating things very succinctly. I have on there, you might want to include acknowledgements, particularly if you have funding, but certainly not required. So just some guiding principles, as you think about your poster development, you want to be clear. You want sentences to be short, or not even a full sentence, but you want it to be clear. You want the structure to flow throughout the poster so that individuals who are looking for the intro or the methods will know kind of where to look if you have intro and methods. If you have conclusions, you want points for folks to walk away from the poster with. We'll talk about kind of how to set that up here in a little bit. It's a great idea that if you have visuals, if you happen to have a graph or a picture that is relevant to your work, to include that, particularly if it's a way of summarizing a lot of information at once. Really encourage you to find ways to put visuals in there, and we'll show a few examples of that. You want to think about this as working to minimize cognitive load. So how do you help somebody look at your poster, know what they should take away from your poster without having to think a lot about it? Remember, Jen showed you that picture. There's only about an hour of time. There's multiple posters that people are walking past. And if you make it easy for people to understand like what you want them to take away from it, they're more likely to remember it, but they're also more likely to engage with you about that poster. And then some folks really want to include things like references or want a copy of the poster, or maybe you have a full paper or some other information that you think, gosh, I really feel like this should be on the poster. I would say the abstract is another example. Neither Jen or I, are suggesting that you put an abstract on there. Really, people can find the abstract in the book for the conference, or again, you could use a QR code to link to that abstract, to link to the paper, to link to the references. You don't need to clutter up your space on the poster with that information. You want to make this easily readable, and so the title should be at least 64-point font. Heading should be at least 48-point, and the body text should not really go below 24-point. Otherwise, you're getting the text too small for people to be able to read it without getting very close up into the poster. You also want to use fonts that are described as sans serif fonts. And so like this is like Arial, Calibre, Veranda. And the way you can tell something is a sans serif font. So the serif is the little kind of lines or strokes that are sometimes added to the bottom of letters. And so you could look at the letter Q here, which I've put in each font. And you can see the sans serif fonts, they don't have that little piece kind of at the bottom or at the top in the way things like Times New Roman, Georgia, or German have. And the reason to avoid this is it just makes it a little bit, harder to read in presentations. This is actually a good idea for PowerPoints as well, to try to avoid those sans serif fonts and instead focus on, or try to avoid the serif fonts and focus instead on the sans serif fonts. So you want to kind of organize things in a particular way. And this was one poster that we did. I think it's a lovely poster. I think we have a lot of things in here. You'll see we have kind of the intro. We kind of talk about kind of chronic pain and primary care. We talk about sort of lessons learned, but I challenge anybody who's kind of looking at this right now, like, do you have any idea what this poster is about? I'm guessing maybe you read the title. I doubt you even did that. My guess is that you're probably looking at the picture in the middle first, trying to figure out what the hell that circle is. This is, while there's a lot of good information on this poster, I think we probably could have done this a lot better. I think it's probably too much information. And while it's nicely laid out, I'm not sure that if you were, you'd really know where to go to find information that you were looking for. You'd have to spend a lot of time, and more likely than not, you're just going to walk right past this poster and say, no, thank you. But it's a really good poster, and there's a lot of good information on it. So you guys may have seen something like this. I mean, so you'll read this first, and then you'll read this, and then this one, and then you'll notice you'll go kind of up to the top. So you can see that how things are laid out on a screen, on a poster, are going to really direct kind of where your eyes go. And it's important to be sort of aware of that as you're designing your poster. And if you take nothing else out of this discussion, if you really want to kind of get some really good ideas about how to design posters, I can't recommend Mike Morrison's website. He has a YouTube channel as well as a website called Science UX. These are kind of listed down here. He has really, he actually is studying poster designs. He is a scientist, but also has a degree in sort of visual arts and helps guide kind of design. And he actually had put out a video a few years ago that really changed the way many organizations are encouraging presenters to format their posters moving forward. And the whole purpose of what he is trying to do is to encourage folks to change the way they do their posters in a way that facilitates people learning as they pass by and makes posters less overwhelming. So he provides some incredible resources here, some of which I've pulled into this presentation as well. You'll see in the video that he has online, he was the one that sort of pushed this design of posters, which kind of many organizations started to take. He will even tell you that this probably is a little bit too simplistic in some ways, and he's adapted this kind of design to include some other elements, but we'll kind of talk about this. But again, this is a really great video that kind of highlights a lot of what we've talked about. So he refers to his design as a billboard design, and it's really kind of set up something like this, where you're putting the main finding here in the middle, along with maybe a graph or some sort of figure that helps to summarize kind of the information or helps to communicate kind of a main point. And then on the left side and right side is where you'll include other information that people might be interested in. So like even the title, the presenter names, the background, the methods, the results, and then other figures, smaller figures that maybe are less important, kind of on the other side, and then listing the authors kind of at the bottom. And so you can see that this is a very sort of different design than the first poster that I had shown you. This is an effort to try to that we did to try to incorporate some of what he was suggesting in here. And so you can see we've put our title kind of at the left-hand side, a lot of supplemental information on the left and on the right. You'll see a lot of that text on the right is way too small and really probably should have been done differently. But what we did do is put the main points right here in the middle. And you're far more likely to read that information and look at these figures in the middle in order to pull the information that we want you to pull about this study. And so from this, in just less than 30 seconds, you know that BHC, behavioral health consultant specific penetration rates are around 20% for depression, but only 5% for tobacco use, 3% for obesity, 1.5% for CBD. And that using the PCBH model yielded statistically significant greater reductions in tobacco use compared to specialty care. And so even this is probably too much text, even as I'm looking at it and reflecting on it. So I don't present these as exactly what you should do, but it is an example of trying to incorporate some of what Dr. Morrison had suggested. This is another way of kind of organizing a poster, putting everything on the left here, putting the kind of main point on the left with a figure that that facilitates the main point, and then organizing kind of the method and some of the outcomes below that. So again, another idea, again, using a QR code. And he's actually done some studies, or there have been some studies that have been done that have looked at things like eye tracking on different kind of poster setups. And you can see kind of on the left is an example of, somebody's eye is going to a lot of different places, maybe highlighting on just a couple of those points, but not really focused on kind of the main points of the study versus the figure on the right, which shows, most of that eye contact going to the figure and to that main finding, so that folks are pulling that away from the study. So that gives you some ideas. And so now we'll talk about, after you've created your super awesome poster, how you can talk to the folks around you.
Thank you. And thanks, Jen and Jeff. I actually learned a couple of things, new things from being part of this presentation. So there are two parts. And so we've talked about the poster. The other part is you, right? So there's the poster and there's you, and you're presenting the poster. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and some tips and tricks for presenting your poster well. Next slide. And so when working with students, and even myself as a student, when I was a student, any type of presentation would create some nerves. But the exciting thing about a poster is that it's very different than typical public speaking. It really is an opportunity to teach something in a very small amount of time, as well as have a conversation with folks about a project that you did and the parts of the project that are exciting, the key take-home points of the project, and other tidbits of information about the project. So when we think about it that way, it's actually can be very fun. As Jen mentioned, sometimes there's food and people are walking around and kind of mingling and networking as they're looking at posters and speaking with poster presenters. And so if we think about the format and the things we've talked about thus far, the poster is a visual and conversational tool that allows you to have conversations with folks about your projects. Now, when you're at a professional conference, you're still being professional. And so it's a little bit more formal than just chit chat with a friend, but it's still not a speech. You're not at a podium. You can kind of move around a little bit. You're having conversations. It might be one person or it might be a group of people, and you're able to answer questions in the moment and maybe even network with folks who are doing projects that are similar, who want to know more about things that are not on your poster, where you're working, what you're doing next. And so it really allows that opportunity for interaction. It's helpful then to know what's on your poster so that you can interact with folks and answer their questions in real time. And you don't have to read it directly, especially when there's a lot of information, but we're hoping that there's not a lot of information on the poster, that you can have these visuals that we've been talking about. But it draws away from the networking and the conversation when folks have to turn and like really just stare at their poster and kind of read what's in each block. That's not really allowing for the conversational aspect. It's not allowing for the networking. And it kind of just pulls people out of the moment. So it can be helpful, especially if you're a person that feels nervous about talking or interacting. And even if you're not, it can be helpful to prepare just your 5-minute elevator pitch about your poster. What are the key points? What were you trying to do? Why did you do this? And what did you learn, right? And practicing can help make sure that you're not reading just off of the poster. And practicing beforehand, sometimes we feel like we don't have time, but even right beforehand, you put your poster up and you're thinking about it, you're reflecting, why did I do this, right? Why did I do this? I did all this work, and what do I want to convey? This also helps you answer questions, because folks will be asking questions maybe without even reading your poster. They may come by and say something like, tell me about your poster, right? Or they may come by and say, well, what was surprising about what you did? Or what's new about what you did? Or how does this relate to the conference theme? Or can you walk me through your poster is a common thing. And so knowing what's on there can help you be able to do that in an effective way that's also engaging with other people. And so how you engage is as important as what you say. And I'll talk about that next. And so, as I mentioned, there's the content on the poster, right? But then there's also you as the vessel of information sharing and engagement. And so there are a couple of things to be aware of. And I think that sometimes in the moment, again, there's a lot of people. Sometimes our poster looks so beautiful, we want to stare at it. And it's really important to remember that we are also interacting and engaging with folks who are going to be walking by, and we want them to stop. We want them to stop and ask us questions and look at our poster. So our body language is kind of the first thing that people see when they're walking through a bunch of posters. So as I mentioned, yes, look at your poster, be proud of yourself, but also make sure you're looking at the folks that are walking by. You don't want to block your poster either, because folks who are walking by and deciding if they want to stop, they're looking at two things. They're looking at your poster and the visuals, and they're looking at you. Do you look inviting? Do you look like a person that's going to answer their questions or that wants to answer their questions? And so it can be very helpful to look outward, have an approachable stance, be inviting. Sometimes you're going to be already in a conversation, and that's okay, but you do want to make sure that you are, you have kind of open body language and you're looking forward. I should say that these pictures are of a former student of mine who has since graduated, presenting a poster that we did. She gave me permission. We actually we set up these photos on purpose for this presentation. And the onlooker is actually my husband, who actually agreed to be in the picture as well. So we do have permission for these photos, and they were for this presentation. And so body language is really important in terms of being engaging, being approachable. What will make people stop and talk to you? Next slide. The other piece is, yes, there's a lot going on. There might be posters that you want to go look at, and you probably will have an opportunity to do that. You do want to make sure you come back to your poster so that you can answer questions. But there also could be other distractions. Like, we're all walking around with our phones. We want to make sure that we're avoiding those distractions as much as possible. It kind of ties back into the body language when we're not making eye contact, when we're looking down, when we look disturbed, as the picture on the left side, we look annoyed or we look uncomfortable, folks are going to walk right past us. They're not going to want to interrupt us. They're not going to want to, see what's going on with our poster. And so if we want to engage in those conversations and those networking opportunities, we will have to try to avoid any unnecessary distractions as much as possible. I have had students, and part of this is nerves, find every reason to not stand at their poster. So they're going to go get another snack, or they're going to stand a little bit next to their poster, but not really. So you can't really tell whose poster it is. Is this your poster here? Or is this your poster here? Or are you just reading the post? Like, who are you? And you want to be clear that you're the person, you're the presenter of the poster. You do want to point out interesting points and findings. And so if someone says, take me through your poster, it is okay to, I said, don't stare at your poster, but it is okay to kind of point to the graphs and the visuals that you have in your poster, direct their eye to the things that are interesting to see, and walk them through the poster. Again, not reading it word for word, because they could do that themselves, but taking them through the key points and the visuals that are on your poster, and really engaging with folks and giving them your attention as well. Because when you give them your attention and engaging them with your poster, they'll ask more questions and want to know more about what you're doing. And again, opportunities for networking are available when you're in these settings where you can actually interact with people. In fact, I don't know for sure, but in terms of giving a speech or a presentation when everyone's in the audience and maybe there's Q&A and maybe a few people come up at the end, there's probably a lot more interaction and opportunities at a poster session because so many people are going through and can actually ask other questions and things that are on your poster, but also things that may not be on your poster, but related to what you're doing and the work that you're doing. Next slide. And so all throughout this, I've been talking about networking, and I've been talking about conversation, I've been talking about engagement, because when you really think about a poster session, those are some of the perks of it being a poster session and not a talk or a speech. Talks and speeches are really important too, and important ways to convey information. But a poster is a very unique opportunity with your visual tool and yourself to engage people on what you're doing. And so you also want to avoid ignoring people who seem interested in your poster. Those people, everyone's important, but those people could be folks that have your next opportunity. Someone who's looking for someone to fill a position, or a student, researcher, or someone who's doing work that's similar and wants to collaborate with you. And so we don't want to miss opportunities by accidentally ignoring folks or being engaged in other things while we're at our poster. So it is really great to answer questions, be open to questions, be open to conversation, engage in conversation with those passerbyers, because you don't know what the next opportunity is that might present itself when you're talking to folks. CFHA, they often do poster walks, and actually, this is not that same conference, but with the same student, I do remember Jen coming by on the poster walk and asking us about our poster on substance use treatment, and asking questions about next steps, and asking questions about how would this be delivered in other types of organizations. And that was a great opportunity to talk about that. And I do believe Jen got my students' information as well. And so it's also, again, a great opportunity to just meet people who are doing research or who are interested in the same topics that you're interested in, and building those networks and those collaborations. And so I'm going to end there because I don't know if we have questions. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Let's open the floor for questions. I did want to comment that when I've done a poster before, this was when I was a grad student, but Aaron Beck, actually, I mean, he was older, but he was walking around the poster session, and he, I guess, always made an effort to go to poster sessions. I think a lot of the, as you get more into your later half of your career, may make that effort more than others, or maybe there are just some people who do that, and so you might end up meeting someone who I felt I had just met, like a rock star to me. Like it was a moment, and I felt indirectly famous for like a sec. So you never know who you might meet, which is great. Yes, let's open up for questions. Rachel, you turned your camera on, so I'm assuming maybe you have a question, but I don't know.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yeah, I do have a question. I also just want to say, like, hi and thank you for putting this presentation together. I'm actually a student in Dr. Jessica Goodman's class, and she's my mentor in many things. And so I took research methods with her this summer, and so we got a presentation on the Better poster. So this mapped really nicely onto that and learned some new things too. And so from my understanding, the hope is for researchers to transition from the traditional poster to the Better poster for all the reasons you named. And I'm just curious, you know, I'm gonna do it when I do my poster presentation in this program, but I'm just curious of how many people, or like what percentage of presenters would you predict, like in a given poster session, are using the Better poster format?
So I've been to conferences where that was the required format. It's not the required format at CFHA. So I've seen a mix of folks. There's still a ton of people who still do more traditional formats. You'll see that, but he has been involved, with fairly large organizations pushing this kind of design, and he's trying to do it from an evidence-based perspective, and he doesn't, there are no absolute rules. His whole thing is like, just try to make it, less overwhelming and more approachable. And here's some good ideas that we're testing out and kind of using. So long-winded answer, but I think it's going to vary on the conference. I think you'll see some folks at CFHA who maybe are more familiar with this kind of use that format, but you'll see plenty of others use more traditional formats.
Yeah, I've seen a mix too. I don't know if Amber, you've seen that, but definitely I see some people embracing it more than others. I think it also depends. I would say that like there are times when I want to use it, but I also have images that I want to ensure that are really able to communicate well the information. And so I do think that it's good to embrace the philosophy. I think the nice thing, like Jeff was saying, is he doesn't necessarily say it has to be done one way. I think the philosophy of what he's trying to communicate is ultimately something very valuable for people to walk away with.
And I think that if you like have your main takeaway in big bold print, somewhere you have a figure that maybe summarizes stuff, and then do whatever else, from there, figure out how you want to present the rest of the information. But it really is that idea is if I'm walking past, how can I in less than, 10 seconds kind of get a sense of what your poster is about.
And I would say I've also seen a mix. I think anecdotally, I've seen, I think, more organizations being more aware of this than schools. Even my school, we have a template that we want students to use, and it's not that, although we do want them to think about the main point and be able to communicate that and have fewer words. Our template isn't that yet. It could be. So I do see a mix still.
Yeah.
How about you, Gracie? You have a question too?
I do. Are y'all able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So thank y'all so much for putting this together. This helped me out a lot. I have never presented a poster before, so everything has been very helpful for me. To preface my question, I am actually an epidemiologist, and so I'm wanting to present some of my work at a conference, probably just an internal conference at the hospital that I work at. But the main thing that I find myself getting caught up in is I get really involved in the methods section of my poster just because I do have a hefty biostatistics background. And so I was just asking for any advice on maybe how to better write a method section for a poster where it isn't overwhelming to the audience, and then also some advice on how to actually highlight the important parts and not get lost in all the nitty-gritty of it.
I mean, I'm always encouraging folks, for any section, like if you have a bullet, try to have that bullet be one line. That's kind of the goal. You're not always able to meet that goal, but that's what you're trying to do. I think, you can, look at how you want to kind of lay this out. It might be that your methods is a little bit longer than maybe what you might see in others, but you probably want to push that off to the side, so that, but still have the kind of main takeaway kind of in the middle. If you really feel like your methods are really complicated and you really want to share them with folks, I would think about utilizing that idea of having a QR code that folks could download. Maybe some of the more complicated descriptions that maybe you feel would enhance kind of the, what you're trying to present. I don't know if that helps.
I think
That-
sometimes it's helpful to work backwards. And I think that's what the other format, the newer format does. It helps you think about the main point first and then kind of work back to what's important to getting there. And I think that if the method is novel or the method is the main point, then there may be reasons to include more detail about the method. Otherwise, what's important about that got you to where you're to that main point, not to all the results of your study, but to the main point that you're trying to convey. But it is tricky. And so I like the QR code idea. I also like to go back to us as a tool. So if we don't have all the information and we want to share more information, or someone's asking us, well, how exactly did you do that? Then we're there to also have that conversation with folks about that.
Awesome. Thank y'all very much. I really appreciate it.
One thing, I realized, and I feel bad about realizing this afterwards, but I'm just going to say it because I feel like the recording, I really want to make sure it's on the recording. One thing that I am doing, and I probably should have mentioned this when I went over context and audience, is that after I'm done with the poster and I've created it, I'm also reviewing it for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I am kind of trying to make sure, Jeff touched upon this a little bit with the visual impairment, kind of making sure that you're using the text fonts, the font types that are best for people to be able to read, and the size font to be able to help people read it. In addition to that, kind of watching out for the color combinations that you're using, as well as the language that you're using in the poster. I do tend to do that after I'm done. I try to be aware of that as I'm building it, but sometimes things, I end up putting blue next to red, and that's not necessarily advised. Or I choose to use a color that isn't necessarily the best for people who have color blindness. So just something to do at the end of your poster is kind of review it for those types of recommendations, and be like aware that, not everyone, I was just talking to our co-lead of the CFHA rec committee, and she is in a cast and hobbling around with crutches, and she's like, it's just amazing to me how hard it is to move about. And it's kind of like the same kind of thing, just recognizing that it's really important to be aware of those things. And oftentimes I tend to do that at the end.
You're also reminding me of folks kind of like you said, like comfort level with standing and things like that. And so the reason why you might practice your elevator pitch is that people don't want to stand at your poster for 30 minutes while you talk to them. Right. It is meant to be kind of an opportunity to engage, starting off briefly. And if someone wants to stay and ask more questions, then they can. And so when someone says, take me through your poster, they're not really saying, read your whole poster to them line by line, right? They're kind of really saying, what's the take home point, right? Why did you do this? And what's the take home point? And so it is helpful to remember that, one, people are going to other posters as well, and you don't want to take up too much of their time if they have other things to do, but also their comfort level. They may be too polite to say, hey, it's very uncomfortable for me to be standing right now, or they may be too shy to lean on something, or they don't have anything to lean on. So just that awareness, that body awareness of your own body, but of other people's comfort levels and body awareness as well, can be really helpful in making sure that you're not keeping people at your poster for too long.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I am a big believer in not extending meetings longer than they need to go. And And this is 7 minutes before, so it gives you some time to transverse to your next appointment. Thank you, Jeff and Amber, for joining me. I think I was the one who kind of pulled you into this, so I do appreciate it. And for those who, were able to make it live, that's great. And hopefully those who watch it recording, it can be helpful to you as well. I hope everyone has a great day. And if you have any interest in this, in the REC committee, the Research and Evaluation Committee, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have people. We often have things that you can become involved in and help us out. So even those who don't know as much.
And Jen, we have a question. We know the video will be available. Are the slides available as well?
I think so. I think they go hand in hand on the website. Typically, Leah or Hannah will convert them and place them up there fairly quickly right after the talk. But if you don't get them, you feel free to email me. I'm Jennifer.Funderburk. So you just check my name at va.gov, or Christina, who I gave you the email earlier for. Or just go back to the email that you found to register. My name and emails in there, and I'm happy to send them to you. But typically they do. It just takes them a little bit to process the Zoom and put it up on the CFHA website. Great. You guys have a great day.
Hey.
Take care.